gabing ito namin yung makapangyarihang paggabay sa pamamagitan ng banal na espiritu upang marami kaming matutunan, lalo na sa kalikasan. Maraming salamat sa iyong pagtugon itong aming panalangin sa pangalan ni Jesus. Amen. So once again, dito po tayo sa ating subject mga kapatid na PSAB 507. Ito po ang biochemistry or the so-called advanced biochemistry. At ngayon po, ang ating lectures ay series po ni Dr. Thomas Manila, Associate Professor of the Western New England University. Ang focus po ng lecture is biochemistry. So, sa gabing ito, ang lectura ay naka-focus sa water, the solvent for chemical reaction. There will be two parts of this. The first part will be taken up tonight. Okay, so without much ado, let's give the time to this particular lecture on water, the solvent for biochemical reaction.
All right, so let's get started. This is the first mini lecture for the first week of class. As I told you guys in class when we went over the course, we're going to chunk these lectures up into mini lectures. So there's going to be 4 mini lectures for this first section here on water. And I'll also apologize for my voice. As I'm recording these lectures, I'm coming off of a bit of a cold, so that'll hopefully resolve itself as the semester wears on. So we're talking about chapter 2 from the textbook today. This is water, obviously something that all of you are familiar with already, and a lot of what we review in these first few lectures are going to be things that you've heard in other classes. We try to start at a place where you're comfortable and already have some prior knowledge, and we'll build off of that. As we go through these chunked lectures, we'll cover polarity as a chemical property and how polarity influences water, and we'll just talk about that in this first chunk here. In the later versions of this lecture and the chunks that you'll see in the next 3 parts, we'll also talk about why water is considered the universal solvent, the idea of hydrophilic versus hydrophobic interactions and properties, hydrogen bonds, van der Waals, and other non-covalent interactions that occur, and we'll talk about acids, bases, pH buffers, and we'll even talk quite a bit about pKa. But in this first mini lecture here, we'll only talk about polarity. So water is a polar molecule. And what we mean by that is that water has 2 different ends. It's important that we go down this road because this planet is a watery planet. Life evolved in a watery environment, and all of us are literally bags of water. You can think of terrestrial organisms as bags of water where the balloon of that bag of water is our skin, and everything that's inside of us is floating in a watery environment. It's no surprise, because you've learned it in other courses, that it's widely believed and understood that life evolved in the oceans first. Life began in water. And so the chemistry of life also evolved to work best in that watery environment. Eventually, after life got complex and it was able to climb out of the oceans and become terrestrial, it wasn't wise to evolve an entirely new terrestrial way of existing biochemically. So instead, when life crawled out of the oceans, it took the ocean with it. All of the biochemistry that was occurring in the water now occurred inside of us. We are essentially bags of salty sea water. So as we go through this semester and we go through these lectures, you'll see just how important water is. It plays a critical role in biochemistry throughout all of the reactions that we're going to be discussing. And so in order to understand how water influences all of that chemistry, we have to understand water itself as its own molecule. And that's what we'll be doing here. So again, water is a polar molecule. It has 2 different ends. Well, let's give that a little bit more meat. What we really mean by 2 different ends is that we have 2 different charges. Water as a molecule has an unequal charge distribution. If we were to say that more simply, we would say that one side of water is a little bit positively charged, and the other side of water is a little bit negatively charged. So we can use this as an example. This isn't water, this is an amino acid, but we can use this as an example of what I'm saying. But wait a minute, there's a problem with this example, because I said that water is a bit negatively charged on one side and a bit positively charged on the other. And here you can see full charges. This is a full positive charge and a full negative charge. So how can anything be a bit charged? What does that really mean? And we get to these partial charges through a chemical property called electronegativity. So water is a perfect example of electronegativity in action. Here's water, a very classical depiction of water, where we have a single oxygen molecule and coming off of it two covalent bonds, one to two different hydrogens. So we have H2, 1, 2 hydrogens, H2O, O for oxygen. So when we say electronegative, we mean fundamental properties of some atoms. Oxygen is a highly electronegative atom, so too is nitrogen, but we're talking about water here, so we'll talk about oxygen first. And when an atom is electronegative, it has a strong affinity for electrons. In other words, electronegative atoms like oxygen exert strong attractive forces onto electrons that they are near. So the electrons that are in the covalent bond between hydrogen and oxygen, and remember what we mean by that, this covalent bond that's indicated here is actually a shared pair of electrons. Those shared electrons zoom around hydrogen, and they zoom around oxygen, and they zoom around hydrogen, and they zoom around oxygen. And because those electrons are making those figure 8 orbitals, they hold these two atoms very close together. That's the covalent bond. And there's another pair of electrons doing the same over here. Those electrons zoom around hydrogen and zoom around oxygen, making those figure 8s and keeping this hydrogen close to oxygen as well. So we have these shared electrons that are making up these covalent bonds between oxygen and hydrogen. And because oxygen is electronegative, it's exerting a strong attractive force on those electrons. So we can think of oxygen as an electron magnet. Oxygen draws electrons towards it. If oxygen is acting as a magnet for electrons, and those electrons are constantly zooming around these hydrogens and oxygens, which of these atoms do you think those electrons will be drawn to more? And if you thought or said oxygen, you're right. Since oxygen is electronegative and oxygen has this magnetic property for electrons, those electrons are going to be spending more time and drawn more highly towards oxygen. So those electrons are being pulled towards oxygen, the electrons of the covalent bond. Remember that electrons are negatively charged, so if electrons are negatively charged and they're spending more time around oxygen, what do you think the charge around oxygen might be? And if you said negative, you're correct. But here's where that bit part comes in. It's not a full negative charge around oxygen because oxygen doesn't always hold those electrons near it. Those electrons are zooming around oxygen and zooming around hydrogen. So as they zoom around oxygen, those electrons slow down because they like being around oxygen. And then as they whip around hydrogen, they do so very quickly so they can get back to oxygen and slow down. And then they zoom around hydrogen very quickly. Because those electrons aren't always around oxygen, that negative charge is not full. But because those electrons are around oxygen more than they're around hydrogen, oxygen does have that negative charge. That's a partial negative charge, and that's symbolized by this lowercase delta. So anytime you see this baby delta, this lowercase delta symbol that I'm indicating here, with a negative charge next to it, that means partial negative or partly negative. Now, back to those examples of those zooming electrons. If those electrons are zooming around hydrogen and oxygen, and they're zooming around hydrogen quickly, and they're lagging when they're near oxygen, and we have a partial negative charge around oxygen, what do you think the charge around hydrogen might be? Remember, hydrogen is electron deprived. Those electrons are racing around hydrogen as quickly as they can so they can get back to oxygen where they want to be. And the answer there is a partial positive charge. Both of the hydrogens of oxygen have a partial positive charge because they're electron deprived. The electrons are spending far less time around hydrogen, and because the electrons are negatively charged, negative charge is spending far less time around hydrogen, making that hydrogen more positive than it would normally be. And this is why water is a polar molecule. It's polar because it has two different ends. It's polar because it has an uneven charge distribution. It's polar because one end of oxygen, one end of water, the oxygen end of water, has a partial negative charge. Electrons are remaining around that oxygen more often. The other end of water has a partial positive charge. The negatively charged electrons are spending far less time around those hydrogens, making them partially positively charged. As I mentioned, nitrogen is also highly electronegative, so when nitrogen is involved in bonds with hydrogen, the same thing happens. The more those electrons spend time around nitrogen, nitrogen takes on a partial negative charge, and the oxygens that nitrogen is bound to remain partially positive. Now I'd like you to imagine this. Imagine another water molecule, identical to this one, floats by, and that water molecule is oriented in the way that I've shown here on this slide. Remember, it's another identical water molecule, so we have a partial negative charge around that oxygen. And now if you look, we have a partial negative charge from this oxygen and a partial positive charge from this hydrogen, and opposites attract. So now we have a partial electrostatic interaction between something that's mildly positive and mildly negative. Because of that attraction, we have a non-covalent bond. Now many of you know of or have taken classes with my wife, and so this idea of opposites attracting probably won't strike you as that foreign of a principle. If you know Dr. QM and you know me, you have all the proof you need that opposites attract. But it's also true here of these partial positively and partial negatively charges. This interaction that I'm showing here, this is a hydrogen bond, or an H bond. A hydrogen bond is a non-covalent bond between an electronegative, partially negative atom and a partially positive hydrogen on another molecule. Said another way, a hydrogen bond is a weak, again non-covalent interaction or bond between a partially positive hydrogen on a H-bond donor molecule and a partially negative electronegative atom such as oxygen or nitrogen on a H-bond recipient or receiver molecule. H-bonds are responsible for many of the properties that we see in life. Enzymes function and are held together into their three-dimensional shape because of hydrogen bonds. And if you've taken cell and molecular biology with me, or even genetics with me or somewhere else, you know that it's hydrogen bonds that keep bases paired in the two strands of DNA. DNA is double-stranded because of hydrogen bonds interacting between base pairs. It's important to have the counterpoint here, which is that not all molecules are polar, of course. Not all molecules behave in this way. Not all molecules have partial charges or are capable of engaging in hydrogen bonds. We also have nonpolar molecules. So here's an example of a nonpolar molecule. This is carbon dioxide. There's no polarity here. There's no uneven charge distribution. There are no partial charges across a carbon dioxide molecule. And so this is a nonpolar molecule. This doesn't have any partial positive or partial negative charges. It doesn't have any full charges, so it doesn't interact with anything in the way that we just described with water. These nonpolar molecules, they have no charge characteristics or no charge chemistry of any kind. The textbook that we use in this course shows this diagram to show water. This is a very, very busy diagram. We see bond angles, van der Waals radii, covalent bonds, but what we want to pay special attention to is the baby deltas. Here we have a lowercase delta positive, meaning this hydrogen has a partial positive charge. And we have a lowercase delta negative here, indicating that this oxygen has a partial negative charge. This face of this water molecule is partially positive, and this face of this water molecule is partially negative. So every water molecule has two hydrogens, which can each engage in single H bonds each. They are single H bond donors. And the oxygen can actually accept two H bonds from another molecule. So we have four possible H bonds that a water molecule can make. If we look at that another way, here the solid lines are covalent bonds, and the dotted lines are hydrogen bonds. Here is the water molecule we're interested in, and we see that this one hydrogen, because it's partially positive, can make an H bond or a hydrogen bond with something else like water. The partial positive here interacts favorably with the partial negative here. This hydrogen, also part of that same water molecule, can do the same and make a single hydrogen bond with something else that's partially negative. The oxygen of this water molecule is partially negative. It can accept 2 hydrogen bonds from 2 different water molecules. 1, 2. And so this one water molecule that we're considering here is capable of making 1, 2, 3, 4 total hydrogen bonds. And indeed, that's what happens in ice. That's why ice has a crystalline pattern, because water makes 4 hydrogen bonds when it engages in ice as a solid form. So, taken at its crux, what we're saying here is that water really likes to stick to water. Water has a high affinity for other water molecules. Water has partial negative charges that can interact with the partial positive charges of other water molecules. And those interactions add up over how many water molecules are being involved. There's strength in those numbers. So we have lots and lots and lots of hydrogen bonds that are possible with water. Each hydrogen bond is fairly weak and non-covalent, but we have lots and lots of them. And so the analogy I always like to use for this example is Velcro. The single interaction within Velcro, one tiny little plastic hook engaged with one hair-width little plastic loop, is a severely weak interaction. If you ever want to see this, and you're very, very bored and have plenty of time on your hands, get a magnifying glass and hook a plastic hook of Velcro to a loop of Velcro on the other sheet. Try to do just one, and look to see how easy it is to pull those two apart. Conversely, if you are to fully engage the soft side of Velcro with the rough side of Velcro, that's a very difficult Velcro interaction to pull apart. You get a very large whoosh as you pull those apart from one another. And that's because lots and lots and lots of weak interactions come together to make a strong interaction in total. Water molecules work exactly the same way. Water sticks to water very well in large numbers because all of those individual very weak H-bonds, like those individual weak hook-loop interactions of Velcro, come together in large numbers and make for a very strong affinity or interaction. When water is in its liquid form, it's constantly exchanging partners for its H-bonds. It's almost like a line dancing endeavor where water makes an H-bond with another water molecule and then rapidly breaks it and makes another H-bond with another water molecule, almost as though they're do-si-doing or dancing arm in arm, trading partners as the song goes on. But again, because so many H-bonds are engaged at any one time, there is a lot of strength in liquid water, of water sticking to water. And this results in a very interesting biochemical property about water, and that is that it is liquid. If a chemist from another planet were to land on this planet, and you were to show that alien chemist the structure of water, that alien, he, she, it, would tell you that water is a gas. Here are two gases we're familiar with. Ammonia is NH3, whereas water is OH2, and methane, CH4. The molecular weight of ammonia is about 17 daltons. Of methane, it's about 16. The melting points are well below zero, and the boiling points are below zero as well. What that means is that ammonia and methane boil well below zero. So at room temperature, it's completely boiled off. It's a gas. Here's water, OH2 or H2O. Its molecular weight is 18. It should have similar melting points and boiling points as ammonia and methane. Well below zero, water should boil and become a gas. And all the water we observe should be a vapor or gas. But we know that's not true. We know that the metric system is actually based on water. The zero of the metric units of the centigrade system is zero because that's where water freezes into solid. And water doesn't boil until you hit 100 degrees centigrade, which is quite high, very scalding. Why? The reason why water is a liquid and not a gas like ammonia or methane, its two close cousins, is because of H-bonds. Water having an affinity for other water molecules, water sticking to water, makes it that more difficult to separate individual water molecules and make them a gas. When water is with water, it holds on tight and it doesn't want to let go. And if you want to break those bonds, you have to put far more heat. In fact, you have to put in 100 degrees centigrade worth of heat to get that water to boil off and let go of other water molecules. Hydrogen bonds are also responsible for another cool trick of water: surface tension. The reason why this water skittering bug is not sinking into that pond is because the water holding on to the other water molecules at the surface of that pond don't want to let go of one another. And in order to let this bug sink, those water molecules would have to let go of one another. This quivering drop, the same thing. This is a bag of water on the end of this branch, defying gravity. Everything we know about physics and biochemistry says that this drop should fall from that branch well before it reaches this size. But the water in that drop is holding on to the other water molecules in that drop, and they don't want to let go. And because water is holding on to water, that drop can quiver there and stay a drop and defy gravity. The gravity force pulling that water down isn't as strong as the hydrogen bond force holding the water to other water molecules in that droplet. So hydrogen bonds between water molecules stop things from slipping in between them because they're holding hands, and keep water stuck to water so that drops can form. So in this first section, we talked about water being a polar molecule. Water is polar because oxygen is electronegative. Oxygen exerts a strong attractive force All right, so let's get started. This is the first mini lecture for the other water molecules in that droplet. So hydrogen bonds between water molecules stop things from slipping in between them because they're holding hands, and keep water stuck to water so that drops can form. So in this first section, we talked about water being a polar molecule. Water is polar because oxygen is electronegative. Oxygen exerts a strong attractive force for electrons in covalent bonds, and that strong attractive force makes that oxygen partially negative. The hydrogens of those covalent bonds are electron depleted, and so they are partially positive. This polar nature of water allows hydrogen bonds to form. The partially positive hydrogen of one water molecule interacts favorably, electrostatically, with the partially negative oxygen of another water molecule. That gives us hydrogen bonds. This is enormously important for water to remain liquid at room temperature so that it can be a universal solvent. Hydrogen bonds also play a role in holding DNA together and allowing proteins to fold properly. So that's it for this first chunk. You can take a break now, of course. This is a good place to stop. But if you want to continue on with the rest of the lecture series for this first unit, you can do that as well. Thanks for watching.
So, nakamute ka po.
Tanggalin mo muna ito dito para. Ikunin mo muna para. So, yun po ang first lecture natin sa water, no? Sa component ng water. Kaya tayo po namamangha po talaga no, sa creation ng ating Panginoon. Yung component ng water. At in the next meeting, we're going also to continue to learn more about water. Dahil si Ma'am Kalim ay hindi na siya possible na makakuha ng 6 p.m. dahil nag-extend na po ang kanilang ministry sa 6 p.m. As we all know, siya po ay konektado sa General Conference para sa isang special ministry to the depressed. So, ang possible nito is either hanapan natin siya ng slots sa ibang araw, pero ang 6 o'clock sa Monday ay hindi na po siya available. Kaya po tayo ay nagkaroon na lang ng video lecture sa subject na biochemistry. At pag ating itong sinusugan mga kapatid, ito ay may mga ilang series din, mga 4 or 5, ay mas lalo nating ma-appreciate ang nature na gawa ng ating Panginoong Diyos. Ngayon, ang ating tinalakay ng ating lecturer na isang doktor from Western New England University ng Amerika ay talaga pong napakaganda, no? Nadagdagan yung aking knowledge about water. Dahil yung water pala ay tinatawag siya yung universal solvent. Bakit po kaya ang water ay tinawag siyang universal solvent? Nakuha po ba kayo sa lecture ni Dr. Menelia? Sino kaya ang makapag-share? Bakit po siya ay tinatawag na universal solvent? Ano po yung mga point na emphasize sa component ng water? Okay? Is there anybody? Una, ano po ang basic components ng water?
H2O po.
H2O. Ano po yung H2O?
2 hydrogen chloride and 2 oxygen. 2 ano po ba yun? Na oxygen, ganun.
4 na yun. Hindi na yung H2O.
Hydrogen po pala is 1, ano lang po yung hydrogen. And then 2, di po ba? Sa ano yung oxygen niya ko lang kung sa ano yun. Anong ano po? Measurement.
2 hydrogen and 1 oxygen po.
One hydrogen at 2 oxygen po. Kaya po siya naging dioxide dahil 2 po yung oxygen po niya. Kaya po di.
2 oxygen. Ano nga yung ano ng oxygen? Merong ano yun eh. Kumbaga parang meron siyang, kumbaga sa milliliters, ganon. Ano yung measurement? Hindi ko ba meron ganon? Meron siya pang ano.
Ang letters po.
Amount ng oxygen doon sa water. Di ba? Ganon. Meron siyang nakalagay doon na yun po ang kailangang i-search.
Ang oxygen ay gas po yan. So, ang water is made up of gas. Tama? Tama po ba, Ma'am Janice? Ang water may component ng gas.
Po. Sa explanation po, Doc, ang water components is gas kasi hydrogen and oxygen po, gas po siya.
Ha? Gas. Gas po pag ang aliens ang magsabi.
Opo.
Ayon doon sa lecture. Pag bumaba daw yung alien, ay sasabihin nila na water is gas. Pero sabi naman ng author, actually water is a liquid. Bakit daw liquid po ang water? Mayroon siyang reasons na in-stress po eh. Pero una, okay. Bakit po ang water kino-consider na universal solvent?
Atoms po pala yun po, atoms of 1 atoms of hydrogen and 2 atoms of oxygen po pala yun.
Siguro itanong natin yan sa exam, no? Bakit ang tubig ay universal solvent?
Doc, good evening.
Hello, good evening. Sino
Uh,
po? Meron pa kayong contribution?
water is the universal solvent because it's a
Sorry.
substance that it's a substance that easily dissolved into variety of substances. Madali lang siya ma-dissolve sa ibang mga substances, Doc.
Madaling ma-dissolve o siya yung nagdi-dissolve?
According to science, ang wording is effectively dissolving the substance in the water.
So solvent siya. Hindi
Solvent.
yung substance ang solvent na dinidissolve yung water. Baliktad.
So ang water pala ang madaling maano sa ibang substance.
So siya yung nagdi-dissolve.
Siya ang nagdi-dissolve sa ibang substance.
O, kaya po tawag sa kanya is solvent. Kaya solvent nga eh. Kaya solvent ang tawag eh. Kasi nagdi-dissolve siya ng mga klaseng mga bagay eh, no? Just for example, nagkape ka, no? Kape. Inilagay mo yung kape sa baso. So, siyempre, hindi naman pwede mong inumin yung kape na walang tubig. Tunawin mo yung kape. So, water, you add water para matunaw yung kape. Diba? Tsokolate. Okay. Kaya nga, dyan na ano po din yung tanong. Bakit daw yung Tide, no? Yung Tide ba? Powder Tide. Pag ang Tide na powder ay i-mix mo sa surf na powder, hindi siya bumubula. Ano sa palagay nyo?
Pag walang tubig.
Anong klaseng chemical? Bakit yung surf powder at saka yung Tide na powder, pag minix mo, hindi siya bumubula? Ha? Eh, walang tubig eh. so, so, yun po, no? Tubig talaga ang nag-dissolve. So, tumutulong siya pag pag-dissolve. Kaya water talaga, no? Kita mo, ang pwede mong sabihin, ang makapangyarihang tubig, no? Na composed ng tinatawag na hydrogen and oxygen. 1 hydrogen plus 1 oxygen. Tama po ba? If si
Two
Doc
hydrogen. Two hydrogen atom.
Hindi po. One hydrogen, dalawang oxygen kasi hydrogen dioxide ang water eh. H2O.
Ganun ba?
Opo. Hydrogen dioxide po siya, Doc. Kaya po siya tinatawag na H2O ang water po. So, dioxide, ibig sabihin, dalawa po. Pag dalawa po yung hydrogen niya, dapat may di din, di ba? Pag dalawa. Kasi pag hydrogen lang, kasi sa hydrogen lang siya. So, wala po siyang halo. Pure po siya na hydrogen. Pero dun po sa oxygen, kasi dioxide po siya. So, may halo po siya. Dalawa po siya na component niya po. Kasi dalawa po yun. Yan lang po.
Aking pagkaalam, kung naalala ko pa yung kung naalala ko pa ng mabuti yung chemistry namin sa 3rd year high school, 1 oxygen, 1 hydrogen plus 1 oxygen equals water. Hindi po siya 2. Kung hindi ako nagkamali. No? So, 1 oxygen, or we call it 1 oxygen atom. No? Ay i-check niyo yung mga kapatid, no? Kasi po matagal na po yung pag-aaral natin, parang bumalik lang tayo ngayon. Ano sa palagay niyo? Baka mali po ako. Check niyo sa science mga kapatid o sa chemistry. Kasi pagkalaala ko sa computation, yung 2 sa gitna, ang isa niyan hydrogen, ang isa oxygen. Kaya it's 2O ang tawag.
Permission to speak po.
Sige po.
Sabi ni Google, a water molecule has 3 atoms, 2 hydrogen atoms, and 1 oxygen atom. That's why water is sometimes referred to as H2O.
So, ibig sabihin, yung hydrogen pala doon, parang kumbaga sa silent lang siya. Wala siyang inilagay na numerical component doon sa formula, no? Ang H siguro, understood na yon na isa lang.
Parang baliktad, Doc. 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom. Kaya siya H2O,
ang oxygen yung 1 lang.
Yes po.
I would sabihin, yung mga numbers pala, it does not precede the letter. Kundi
Opo.
it comes after the letter. So yung H2O pala, yung 2
Meaning 2
represents
hydrogen. Yes po.
Oxygen na
And
wala
1
siyang
oxygen.
numero. Yung oxygen na walang numero,
Meaning
ibig
1.
sabihin, automatic yan na 1 lang siya.
Opo. Yun
Opo,
yung
Doc.
sabi dito. I just don't know kung may ibang explanation po.
Yun din po yung tinuro sa amin noon, ma'am.
Parang yun na nga siguro eh, no? Oo, parang next pala yung ano ko, yung memory, no? Parang ano nga eh, parang kung i-analyze natin yung numero comes after the chemical ano tawag niyan? Chemical
Element.
symbol, no? Like for example, H for hydrogen and O for oxygen. Maganda, no? Hydrogen. Pag hydrogen lang, wala ding water na napoproduce. Not until mayroon siyang oxygen. Eh bakit po pag pinapakuluan yung tubig, nauubos?
Evaporate, Doc. Evaporate yung water.
Bakit siya nagiging gas?
So, nasipa.
Hindi, ang water, hindi siya gas.
Yes, nagas. So,
Pero, it turns
yes.
into gas. Pero bakit po? Ano sa palagay niyo, nung mga medyo na ano niyo?
Di ba po yung oxygen gas?
The heat.
So meron siya kasing meron
siyang
siyang component na gas.
na
So
gas.
yun yung matitira na lang.
Pero, hindi siya gas.
Opo, yung pag pinagsama siya, meron siyang, I mean, pag yung oxygen lang kasi, hindi siya water. Or pag hydrogen lang, hindi siya water. Magkasama kasi si hydrogen tsaka si oxygen.
And the two becomes one. And the three becomes one. And the two becomes one. Tama naman, no? Kasi doon, ay okay. Kasi di ba doon sa picture ng ng video ay tatlo yung molecules. So tatlo talaga, no? Dalawa yung oxygen doon at yung isa doon ay na molecule or atoms, no? Ay yun ang gas component. Tama po ba? Yung nakita niyo yung yung video? Di ba yung parang nakikita din natin yan sa science kasi mayroong mga niyan may mga gadget. May mga parang illustration instruments about the formation of molecules or atom. Teka, baka ma-confuse tayo. Ang molecule po ba at atom pareho lang?
Sa pagkaka-recall ko po, mas maliit yung atom. Tama
Atom.
ba, Ma'am Janice?
Ayun ang pinakamaliit talaga. Ano naman yung molecule?
The smallest particle po, molecules.
Mas maliit yung molecule.
Atom.
Opo,
Smallest
mas maliit
particle
po
of
siya
an
sa
atom no? Oo nga.
Opo.
Smallest particle of an atom is molecules.
Part siya pala sa atom. Yung molecule.
Opo, Doc.
Molecules. Kung molecules, ano naman yung molecules? Yung may mole pero cute tingnan, di ba?
Maliit yun, Doc.
May mole siya pero cute siya tingnan. Molecule, joke lang. Okay. So, ano po yun? Sino yun? Ang gusto mo salita? While waiting for Doc Joey. Kasi maganda yung usapan. Nakakatuwa yung mag-discuss ng mga ganito ng atom. So, kasi po ang atom, pag in-split mo, kasi yung hydrogen bomb ay yun eh. Ay hydrogen bomb ay yun, atom na in-split eh. No? Ano nyo yan? Yung parang nasa teorya ni Albert Einstein. No? Kaya yung ano niya, discovery yung ano niya ay yung kanyang na-discovery ay nag-lead to the formation of the atomic bomb. Nagkakaroon kasi ng tinatawag na ano reaction. Ang liliit naman yun, pero may mga ano pa rin, may mga paraan pa rin para ma-split mo siya. And when the atom splits, terribly din ang nangyayari pag na-split mo Kasi nagkakaroon ng tinatawag chemical reaction. Yung chemical reaction na yan, parang katulad yan ng tinatawag na na yan ang yan mga hydrogen bomb, yung ganun. Magkakaroon ng tinatawag na radiation. Okay, di ba? No? Kaya napaka ang tao di ba 70% water? So sobrang dami ng atom sa katawan pala ng tao. Kaya ang tawag sa kanya sa isang is the bionic man. Pero ang pinagtataka ko, bakit pag pinainitan mo yung tubig, nauubos, nawawala ba, nagdi-disintegrate ba naghihiwalay ba ang hydrogen at saka oxygen? Ano sa palagay niyo?
Dahil sa init, nag-evaporate.
Kaya nga, pag
Pag pabayaan mo
nag-evaporate
yan,
siya, ibig
maubos
sabihin,
yun.
magiging na lang siya, gas.
Gas na lang.
So saan napunta yung hydrogen?
Pwedeng magpapunta sa gas lahat yun Pagpabayaan, Dok. Pwedeng mapunta sa gas lahat. Mawala na sa siya. Pagpabayaan mo lang na kumulo siya ng kumulo.
So kaya
Hanggang
nga,
sa walang
tinatanong
matira.
ko, nandyan ang gas. So ano naman ang chemical component ng gas na nag-evaporate?
Water din, pag naipon.
Considered ba siya na oxygen?
Oxygen.
Di ba?
Water din yun Pag yung nag-evaporate yung galing sa dagat pag naipon sa ulap water na naman yun
Ang boiling water kasi, pwede kang makakuha ng kuryente sa boiling water
May power.
Opo, di ba may yan? Ano ba yung tawag doon? Kahit nga yung anong tawag nila niyan? Yung hydropower pala. Okay, hydropower katulad ng Mountain View.
Ay, may kwan naman yun, Doc. May dinamo naman yun. Kinagabitan nila ng kwan na naging hydropower.
Oo, pero kung walang puwersa ng tubig, hindi magkakaroon
wala
din
yun,
ng
nga.
production of
Kaya,
energy.
magtataka tayo, Doc simpleng water pero maraming nagagawa lang pala. Maraming pwedeng magawa ang tubig lang, simple lang pero ang daming nagawa. Maging isang powerful. Kaya makapangyarihan ng tubig na binigay ng Panginoon ng tubig sa atin.
Water. Makapangyarihan din ang sunlight. Kasi kaya niyang tuyuin ang water. Diba? Pag sobrang init,
Ma-dehydrates ka.
ubos din ang
Tuyuan ka.
water, no? Katulad dyan sa kanila ni Ma'am Janice, no? Ma'am Janice, kamusta yung ano nyo dyan, El Nino?
Sobrang init po, Doc. Last na ulan po naranasan namin dito nung December pa po. Ngayon, tuyo na talaga. Pati yung mga palayan, Doc, failure yung mga farmers kasi nasusunog din po yung palay ng iba.
So, ano ang
El
tawag doon?
Niño.
So, ang
El
ano
Niño.
po ano po talaga ang
Drought.
blessing? Yung sun
Right.
o yung sunlight?
Sunlight.
Na nanggagaling sa sun.
Nanggaling sa
Kasi pag sun na, parang hindi na blessing. Ano?
Kailangan yan na ito.
Oo, kapag init po, Doc.
Balance.
Susunugin ka na eh.
Opo. Pero advantage din po, Doc, kasi mga fruit trees po, ang ganda po ng nag-flower bearing na po sila. Ang ganda po ng nila ng flower po ng mga fruit trees.
Hello, Doc.
Hello.
Para sa akin ang sun yung mas importante kasi mayroon siyang parang trinity ba? Energies, light at saka yung excuse me muna. Sun, mayroong light, energy at heat. So, ang sun ay kailangan natin.
Okay. Nandyan na po ba si Doc Joey?
Andiyan na po.
Okay, so let's have a break for 2 to 3 minutes. Then we'll give time to Doc Joey. If you have time, you take some readings, no, about water, no, para mas lalo tayong mamangha sa kapangyarihan ng water. Kasi ang water ay napakalaki ng role niya eh. Sa gamot, paggagawa ng gamot, no? Kahit lang naman sa pag-iinom ng water. So, mayroong warm water, dikto ng hot water, yung interaction ng tao sa water. So, grabe pala ang usage ng water. Ang sabihin natin yung usability ng tubig. No? Kung minsan hindi natin na-appreciate, no? Kasi siyempre nandyan lang siya sa palibot. Pero yan pala ay universal solvent. Importante sa napakaraming mga bagay ang tubig. Okay, so let's proceed to the next subject.